Good evening. I'm glad that you made it out this evening. We'll continue through Exodus with probably one of the larger stories that matters for larger segments of the Bible, and specifically when you get to Revelation. And studying the symbolism from Revelation, there's a lot of it that starts right here in Exodus chapter 19 and 20 with look at God. Look and see who He is. And when God shows up, this is what happens, and this is what you can expect. This language that is used in Exodus 19 is found, and we'll end our discussion tonight in Revelation, but it is found later on to say when God shows up, the earth can't stand it. It can't just be. It gets exciting. Things happen. And when God manifests Himself, there's just so much. There's so much what? And we'll see that as He descends on Mount Sinai. Remember that Jesus says later on that, if the people following Him were to be quiet, that the very stones would sing out. The earth is excited because the Creator has come. Okay, so now we'll start in Exodus chapter 19 with God meeting His people and telling them what He wants from them. Exodus chapter 19, we'll start in verse 1. On the third new moon, after the people of Israel had gone out from the land of Egypt, and on the day they came into the wilderness of Sinai, they set out from Rephidim and came to the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain. Okay, what is this like? They go out, they've crossed the Red Sea, they've gone through a desert, and they've come to a mountain. I don't think I have to explain to you what it means to be before a mountain. You probably understand that much better than I do. But what is the setting? What does it feel like? Well, based on the time, because it tells us about the new moon and what time frame it is, it's late May or early June. And now 3,000 years later, so it may be completely different, but currently the average temperatures during the day are 95 to 104 degrees. And the average lows are not that much cooler, 70 to 79 in the evenings, I would assume. And the chance of rain is a whopping 1%. 1%. It might have happened in recorded history that it rained one time in this time frame. It's hot. It's dry. They've got nothing, and now they're before the mountain. Verse 3. While Moses went up to God, the Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant. You shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. They've been saved. They were saved when they went through. We're told that as they go through the Red Sea, that they were baptized into Moses, is the phrasing that is used in the New Testament. They've been saved. Now, 3 months later, I'm going to give you instructions. Now, therefore, is verse 5. Now, therefore. There is something that we can take from this, in that they're not inundated with rules. If Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Numbers were written while they were still in Egypt, while they were sitting around the meat pots and enjoying their food, as they would claim that it was so wonderful back in Egypt, if they were inundated with, listen, now let me tell you about this, when flies land on your flour, you've got to throw it all out. When you have any bodily function that doesn't go just absolutely perfect, you're going to have to sleep outside, and you're going to have to memorize these. Are you writing them down? If he gives them all of these things in Egypt, how confusing. How weird. He offers them salvation. And then he saves them. And then he provides for them. And whenever they've understood the salvation of God, he says, now listen, here are the rules. We can understand that. When you're talking to someone about God, they need to know about salvation. Yes, we understand there are a lot of rules. There are things that God requires of us, and we're called to be sanctified. That's how verse 6 is, that they're supposed to be set apart. But first is salvation. And 3 months later, let's get particular about the rules. This is the way God has done it. I'm just saying that we can learn something from that. In verse 6, you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The word we used this morning was sanctify. You will be sanctified and be set apart and be something different for God. That you will have a portion of your life that is, this belongs to God, and I make sure to give it to Him first. This word will come back up, but it starts here in verse 6. God's people are always a people with a purpose. We have been created to do a thing. We're not just people in name only. We're not just Israelites drug along because we got lucky with our lineage. You were called by God. You were saved through the blood of His Son. And now we have a job to do. We are set apart for a reason. We don't just exist to fill a building. We have a job to do. Let's keep reading. We're in verse 7. So Moses came and called the elders of the people and set before them all the words that the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and may also believe you forever. Now, my Bible breaks a paragraph there because the thought seems to continue in the rest of that verse with the paragraphs coming next. What comes next is a summary of the event. Moses is going to go up on the mountain. The people aren't allowed to come onto the mountain, and God is going to give them instruction. We've seen this before with other scriptures, but it can be confusing. It can read like the whole thing lasts like 10 minutes, and Moses goes up, he comes back down, and they've got some laws. This is actually a much longer event, and what we've seen or what we've read so far is that this will be done. It will be done in their presence, and that as we're going to read for the rest of it, it's a summary of how this entire event will play out. So keep that in mind as we move forward from here. But in verse 9, that he's going to descend in a thick cloud that the people may hear when I speak to you. Now, he's only going to speak to Moses. He's going to talk to all of them at the beginning, but he's only going to sit down, as it were, and speak with Moses. This is going to be done in all of their presence. They're all going to see this. When God does something, He does it out in the open. When Jesus preaches, He does it out in the open. When He performs miracles, He does it for everyone to see. When God acts, it is for us to be able to get it, to understand. Your Bible is written so that you can get it, so that you can understand, so that you can take it to someone else. One of the major complaints that we have about our government today is that they do so much in secret behind closed doors. And I'm not trying to make any accusations in any direction, but if that weren't true, then some of the promises that some of them make for transparency and clarity wouldn't need to be made. What God does, He does so out in the open that He does it on a mountaintop so that everyone before Him can see. When God works, it is for everyone to know, to see, and to understand. We'll continue with verse 9 here. When Moses told the words of the people to the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Let them wash their garments and be ready, for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. And you shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up into the mountain or touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot, whether man or beast, he shall not live. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and consecrated the people, and they washed their garments. And he said to the people, be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman. They are to be prepared for holy use. Jeremy, this is the word that I asked you about in verse 10 there. Moses is told, go to the people and
consecrate.
No, you don't. That's that new King James, that heretic Bible. Old King James and the older version of the New King James will say sanctify. You have sanctify? Sanctify them. Again, the word that we've been using. Do you know the definition of the word consecrate? It means to sanctify. They actually mean very similar things. Sanctify means to set apart for a purpose. Consecrate modifies that only slightly to say set apart for a holy purpose. So that Moses is told to go down to the people and to set them apart for a holy purpose. Man, I worked that out. I even found the right translation. Set apart for a holy purpose. And if they're not, then verse 13, one of the weirdest phrases in all of the Bible, they'll get shot. They'll be, the word here being pierced through, that they will be shot. And as part of their consecration is mentioned in both verse 10 and verse 14 that they are to wash their garments. They're to prepare themselves. They're to be totally ready for God to come. How much can we see foresight in that? Have you not heard that sermon a dozen times? To be prepared for the coming of the Lord. Would we sing that song? Or any number of those songs with that same sentiment? When you're going to be in the presence of God, you better be prepared. You can't just stand in front of God and be not distinguished. Nadab and Abihu will do that later on. Nadab and Abihu will do that later on. They'll act however they want in front of God. God will teach them otherwise. But immediately after they have been destroyed by the fire of God, they're going to have it written down. You'll distinguish between what is holy and what is common, between what is unclean and what is clean. And when you come into the presence of God, when it is that you are going to approach God, and any time that you're going to stand before Him or say anything in His name, you better be right. Or you might want to be ready to face the consequences. You could get shot. I didn't know... This is the only place it's used in all of the verse, and it means something so different for us now, to be shot. And it's peculiar. We can talk later about it if you like, but that word itself is just so real, even in today's language, to be destroyed like this. So they're going to meet God. Verse 16 is where we are. On the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a very thick cloud on the mountain, a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people of the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of a trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the Lord answered him in thunder. The Lord came down on Mount Sinai, on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down and warn the people, lest they break through to the Lord to look, and many of them perish." Also let the priests who come near the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them. And Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you yourself warned us, saying, set limits around the mountain and consecrate it. And the Lord said to him, go down and come up, bringing Aaron with you, but do not let the priests and the people break through and come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them. So Moses went down to the people and told them. Moses is going to go up and down several times throughout this interaction. The interaction is actually written throughout other of the books of the Bible, as it recalls how it is that he gives the law. And there is the repetition. And when I was first reading this, preparing for this lesson, and reading through chapter 19, one of the things that stood out to me is the repetitions that show up. Consecrate or sanctify shows up twice. Washing the garments shows up twice. And something very peculiar also shows up twice. God says, set boundaries and don't let them come near. And then later on again says, set boundaries and don't let them come near. It's so peculiar that even Moses says, you already told us that. They can't come near. We've set up the boundaries like you wanted. There's a really cool rope fence. You should see it. The beasts can't break through. We're not going to have to shoot anybody. But God makes sure to say it again. The Lord is not in the habit of wasting ink. Why is it in there twice? Well, one reason is because the people themselves will see that Moses is delaying. That's the word that is used, is that when the people saw that Moses was delaying, they got antsy. They needed some gods. That's how they put it. That's what they want. Then they start tearing out their earrings and having Aaron make for them a golden calf. As impressive as God is, and we'll talk later in Deuteronomy, in Exodus chapter 20, verse 18, where the people get really impressed with seeing God, that wears off. And we've talked in previous sermons about how, as impressive as God is, it kind of, our desire for Him, our passion, our fervor, sometimes it just wanes. We become lackadaisical and just sometimes just lazy in how we feel toward God. Our zeal just kind of meh. So here they're warned twice, because this is going to take a while. Moses is going to be up on the mountain, and the people will consider him to be delaying. We never do that, right? We never say God isn't moving fast enough for us. We don't have signs that say, God, give me patience and give it to me now. Right? We don't say things like that. We don't consider things like that. We never think that God could move just a little bit faster, right? Oh no, that's absolutely what we would say, or what we might think, or something that we might even feel, and that they're warned against early on. While they consider him to be delaying, and you think, God's not moving fast enough for us. We need to worship something. So Moses gives them a golden calf and says, this is what brought you up out of Egypt. Moses is going to be up on the law, writing the laws down. They will be able to be set before people. And the books that he's writing very well could be Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, so that they would have that. Whether that's the exact way it's written or whether it works in a different way. He's writing down the laws so that they will have those words before them. How many? It's going to be called the Book of the Covenant. He's going to be writing down quite a few words. It takes a while to write a book. I would assume even with God's help in writing it, he's going to have a book's worth. Not only that, not only a book of laws, but a book of God's laws. A book of perfect laws. A book of rules and of statutes that are going to be so perfect that our Christ 1,500 years later will say that not one jot or tittle, not one little mark inside the law is going to pass away until it's been fulfilled in him. That's the importance. That's the particular nature of what he's writing down. He's going to be on the mountain for a little while. He's going to be talking with God for a little while. And the people are going to get bored. They're going to get antsy, even staring into their God. The people are given what is called in some circles the Decalogue, which is 10 words. That deca and log meaning 10 words. That they are given 10 things. We understand them to be 10 commandments. And this is what God speaks to them from the cloud. Before anything that is written down, before anything is done, as the mountain is engulfed in smoke and fire and trembling, and it's crazy, and their response is, in verse 19, they tell Moses, you speak to us, Exodus chapter 20, verse 19, you speak to us and we will listen, but do not let the Lord speak to us lest we die. We're scared to death of this God. And these are the words that he tells them. We'll start in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 1. The Lord spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his male servant or his female servant, or his ox or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. And the people see it, and they are incredibly impressed. Their God comes down on the mountain, wraps it in smoke and fire, and people will say, well, you know, you're describing a volcano pretty well, right? The ground rumbles. There's fiery stuff that flies through the air. There is an incredible amount of smoke. There's a smell. There's a whole presence to it. And when you're there in the presence of something like a volcano, it's just awe-inspiring. And while that may very well be true, that to stand at a volcano that is billowing may be awe-inspiring, our God showed up to a mountain, and it's a miracle that any of them survived. When he shows up, this is the reaction. It's not a volcano. He doesn't stand inside of a volcano and scare the people with the natural phenomena that he has created. He is the phenomena that is completely unnatural and should be impressive down to our very core, because he's the one who created it. God speaks to them and tells them, hi, I'm your God. And he doesn't say hi, but that's how he starts. I am your God. Do it like this. Don't act like that. And gives them a list of things that they are to adhere to. And as soon as these things start coming out, these, what we will consider the highlights of how to behave with one another, the people say, this is too much. We can't handle this. Moses, you're going to have to talk to him for us. This is how impressive our God is. They don't want to meet God. They don't want to meet God. When the people saw, verse 18, chapter 20, when the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood afar off and said to Moses, "You speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us lest we die." And Moses said to the people, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that you may fear him, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin." And the people stood far off, while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. They are terrified of God. The words that are used in the Bible are literally that they are scared to death, that we die. We're scared to die because he is near to us. Why am I repeating this? Because this is supposed to be impressive. And if your heart doesn't melt and say, to stand in the presence of God is something that I am fearful of, then maybe it's a good thing that twice they're told, draw a circle around the mountain and don't let them get near to God. You're not ready. You're not ready to come near to God. If you're not awe-inspiringly impressed of God, then you're not ready to meet him. 633 in your hymnal is "Prepare to Meet Thy God." It's a really cool song. It's a great song. I'm glad we're not singing it tonight. It's a really cool song. First words, careless soul. Why? Because there should be a warning. You don't just walk into the presence of God. You need to understand your place, and you need to understand his place and who he is before you approach him. God is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Of any of the people that have ever met him, of all of the handful that Scripture tells us have gone into the presence of God or the likeness of God, the impression that they come away with is one of fear and dread. We know we don't belong here. All of the millions of people that are here, a couple million is what some estimates are, that are standing before God and they say, we don't belong here. We're scared of him. Isaiah will say the same thing. I am a man of unclean lips, and I'm from an unclean people. John will say the same thing in Revelation, where he will have to be sustained by angels just to receive the revelation. God is terrifying, and we should be ready only, and we should, in knowing that we will meet him, we should do everything we can to be ready for that event. The language that is used here for God is a precedent that is used, that is identified in Revelation. In verse 16, 18, and 19 of Exodus 19. So Exodus 19 in verse 16. On the morning of the third day there were thunders, lightnings, a thick cloud on the mountain, very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people of the camp trembled. Verses 18 and 19. Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the Lord answered him in thunder. This language is used in Revelation. In fact, the last day is described in the same wording. We'll go to Revelation and spend the rest of our time there. Revelation chapter 14. In Revelation chapter 14, we'll start in verse 1. And I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. Let me interrupt here real quick. This number comes from chapter 7, and we'll go over there in a minute. But the number that comes here is a computation that means all of God's people from everywhere, ever. So when you see this number here, it means that all of those who are saved are standing with the Christ. They have God's name on their forehead, like a helmet of salvation. Continuing in verse 2. And I heard the voice from heaven like the roar of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. And the voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they were singing a new song before the throne and the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb. And in their mouth no lie was found. They are blameless. They are consecrated. It even includes that they have not defiled themselves with women. And if you'll think back to verse 15 from Exodus 19, the people are told as they consecrate themselves to stay away from women. It should have been a great warning for us guys, and it makes for a decent joke in a sermon. Girls are gross. They'll get you in trouble. But here, the language is the same. That they are consecrated, they are redeemed, they are set apart. They're prepared for that. Let's go to chapter 7, Revelation chapter 7. We'll start in verse 9. Before this, it is the description of those who are saved from the Old Testament. And then in verse 9, we have the description of those saved in the New. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude, Revelation chapter 7, verse 9, great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and all peoples and all languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands, crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and the Lamb. And all the angels were standing around the throne, and all the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, Who are these, clothed in white robes, and from where have they come? I said to him, Sir, you know. And he said to me, These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white with the blood of the Lamb. This event can't even start until they've been consecrated. This rejoicing before the throne, this making it to heaven, this doesn't even start until the people are consecrated. The event from Exodus chapter 19, it can't even start until the people are consecrated. You go get them clean, Moses. You go make them clean, and you set them apart for this holy service, this holy ability to come before the presence of God. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. If you want to open your songbook, or you can follow along, we're going to finish the chapter out. But if you want to open your songbook, you'll find that the song selected is very similar, very close. The same sentiment here. And what we're going to encourage ourselves to do as we sing that song is that if your robes haven't been made white, if you haven't become a Christian and put on that helmet of salvation, or as it was written in chapter 14, have God's name written on your forehead, being in covenant relationship with Him, if you haven't been sanctified and consecrated, then do that tonight. Have yourself washed in the blood of the Lamb. And don't leave here with your garments soiled. Let's work on that together if you need to be restored in any way, so that we can do, as verse 15 through 17 carry on, to be inspiring for us to have done. Therefore they are before the throne of God. They serve Him day and night in His temple, and He who sits on the throne will shelter them with His presence. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more. Sun shall not strike them, nor scorching heat. For the Lamb is in the midst of the throne. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd, and He will guide them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. These are not scared to death people. These are people who are enjoying the paradise of being with their God. That sounds good to me. That's what I want. That's why I want my robe washed in the blood of the Lamb. That's why I became a child of God. That's why I want to keep my robe clean. God scares them to death with the thunder and the cloud and just his awe-inspiring presence. But in verse 15 of Revelation 7, he will shelter them. That's what I want. If this isn't the relationship that you enjoy with God, let's fix it. I want this relationship for you too. If you need to fix anything between yourself and your God, to become a Christian or to be restored so that you can inspire other Christians and edify them as well, make it known as we stand and sing.